The theme tonight is attunement. How do we attune ourselves to God, to God's grace, God's love, God's light, God's truth, God's beauty, God's goodness? And how do we attune ourselves to the Guru, who is for us the embodiment of the divine? So let me start this way. God's light is always shining on us and within us, shining from above. And because we are, each one of us, made in the divine image, that light is always percolating within us. Always. Whether we're talking about great saints or great sinners, it's always shining. It can't not shine. If it ever stopped shining, we would cease to exist. It's what sustains us. This is the problem, though. Because of our egoic machinations, our egoic attachments, our egoic prejudices, it creates a shadow. And in that shadow, we can't perceive the light. It's always there. But again, the ego creates like a shadow over us that keeps us from perceiving it. And so how we learn to perceive it, certainly initially, is by practicing attunement to God and the Guru. I have a number of quotes. First one is from Yogananda. Well, it's one of Yogananda's direct disciples. And it captures the essence of this attunement. Yogananda would often quote the passage near the beginning of the Gospel of John. Quote, "To all who received him, to them he gave the power to become children of God." End of quote. And this is Kriyananda. He goes on to say, "The whole secret of the spiritual life is to get the ego and the attachments and the desires that cling to it like barnacles out of the way, and to receive into our souls the blessing of God, to begin to perceive that light." So let me give you a good example of attunement. And first of all, what I want to say is we are always attuned to something. Always. None of us live like isolated islands. Sometimes we're just attuned to our own subconscious thoughts and feelings and desires that we're not even aware of. Sometimes we're attuned to those thoughts and desires that we are aware of. We're attuned to other people. We're attuned to everything that's happening in the environment. We are always attuned to something. And the question is, what is it that we are attuned to, and is it serving our evolution? So let me give you an example of attunement. God did not give me the gift of a good musical ear. Vicky tries to help, but even Vicky can't fix the limitations of my musical ear. But I want to share one experience once. It was when Swami Nirvanananda was here, and it was a Thursday night service, or maybe it was a kirtan. And so I had Swami here singing, and Vicky here singing. And after a while, and this doesn't happen much, I became attuned to them and their voice and their musical frequency. And I remember as I was singing with them, like, wow, for once I am on key. And then it took on a whole nother dimension, that my voice merged with Vicky's voice, it merged with Swami's voice, and then there was just this one voice. Do you see how that works? That's the essence of the spiritual life. It is attunement, attunement, attunement. Until our voice and God's voice and the Guru's voice become indistinguishable. That's what St. Paul meant in the New Testament when he said, no longer I that lives, but Christ that lives in me. He was so attuned to the Christ consciousness that the egoic part of Paul had slipped away. And there was just the symphony of Christ consciousness percolating through him. That's attunement. So I want to talk about tonight how we nurture attunement. And my primary scripture tonight is going to be from the Bhagavad Gita. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, it is the primary scripture in India. There's many scriptures, but it's the most popular. And I'll just tell you what Yogananda said. You don't have to agree with Yogananda. I agree with him. But he said that the Judeo-Christian scriptures and the Bhagavad Gita were the two most complete scriptures. So I hold the Bhagavad Gita in high esteem. I put it on par with the Gospels. All right? So this is a quote from Krishna. And I'm going to break it down in the rest of my talks. He's telling us how to be attuned. He who is free from hatred towards all creatures, Democrats or Republicans, he who is free from hatred towards all creatures, whose love is the same for his friends and enemies alike. He who, devoid of ego and possessiveness, has disappeared, is even-minded in suffering, joy, forgiving, ever contented, a regular yoga practitioner possessing the firm determination with mind and discrimination, surrendered to me. He is my devotee and dear to me. Now, I want to just translate that last line. We're all equally dear to God. God doesn't have any stepchildren. But if that shadow is blocking that light, we will never experience ourselves as being dear to God. So again, I'm going to break what he has said down in parts to talk about how we can nurture this attunement. So the first thing is, and I touched on this last week, I'm going to say it a little bit differently. When we commit to the spiritual life, and often in the very beginning, there's a honeymoon period, right? But I think we've all had those moments where everything you pray for just comes. It's like a hot knife through warm butter. It's so easy, and we think it's always going to be this way until it's not. So what happens when we truly engage in the spiritual life, there is this inspiration, this energy, but soon after that, all the machinations of the ego are going to come up. And there are going to be moments in the spiritual life where it feels like, and in a sense, we are swimming upstream. We're swimming against the current. It can't not be. The ego's machinations, again, are going to come up. And they come up in the form of fear, regret, shame, self-hatred, ideology, all kinds of things. But it's going to come against us. And that's when practicing attunement becomes so important. So the first thing, and I'm just picking out words from the Bhagavad Gita here, the first thing he mentions silence. And you hear me say this again and again, but it's so essential that we have to have moments, ideally every day, of silence. Not just in meditation, but just moments where we just are in silence, letting go of all of the thoughts, letting go of all of the assumptions, and again, entering into or even getting an intuition of the great silence. Because in that silence, the machinations of the ego, they can't percolate. There's nothing for them to grab onto. And yeah, when we come out of the silence, they maybe reemerge, but they reemerge with less strength. So every time to quote the Psalm, be still and know that I am God, we enter into that stillness, it weakens the machinations of the ego. And then over a period of time, we carry that silence with us. Now, what I want to say just in terms of the culture is that we have a scarcity of silence. We have a scarcity of silence. There's a Catholic priest I know that I respect a lot. And he told me one day a week he takes his cell phone and he puts it in the drawer. And if there's an emergency, there's a way to contact his secretary and she gets in contact with him. So however we do it, we have to nurture that silence. See, because if we're not, then we're just attuning with whatever the dominant noise is, the dominant energy that's coming our way. That's why I like to say, if you're going to watch the news for half an hour, that's okay, then meditate for an hour. Right? So however we can nurture that silence and that stillness, it weakens the machinations of the ego, and in that stillness and silence, we are receptive to grace, to energy, to that light. It's much easier to perceive it and to experience it. The second thing that I'm going to highlight that Krishna talks about is, and I'm going to quote Jesus, but it ties into what he was saying, because there's another place in the Gita where he says, I love this, it's one of my favorite lines of the Gita. He said, by whatever name you call to me, I will come to you, for you are dear to me. So, and then Jesus said it a little bit differently, but it's the same message. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be open. But again, our job is to knock. Our job is to call upon God, the Guru, so that that shadow clears away and we can feel and sense the light. I'm going to share a story that Isha shared when she was here, because it's very powerful. And let me put it in a context. In the autobiography of a yogi, Jesus said, Yogananda said, whenever we say the name of Babaji with devotion, he said there's an instant blessing. Because the grace that emanates from Babaji clears away the shadow, the fog, the dross. And there's a Christian tradition that whenever you need, just say the name of Jesus. And the same thing, the light of Christ clears away the fog and the shadow. Anyways, the story that Asha told, it was a woman that she knew, a young woman who was into heavy metal music and all of that. She wasn't very spiritual, and she committed suicide. Now, she came back. But she went into a kind of astral hell. And this young woman said she looked around and there were just other people who had committed suicide and they were just miserable. But she said right above were these angels, angelic beings, trying to help them out of their darkness. But most of them were so caught in their darkness that they weren't reaching up. And although this young woman was not raised in a particularly religious home, something in her just said the name Jesus. And she said instantly that allowed these angels of lights to pull her out of the darkness. And then they said, don't do that again, and you're going back. Okay? So, I will just tell you in my own life, there are times I just say, God, Christ, Guru, or Babaji, Jesus. And if we say it with sincerity, from the depths of our souls, it clears away that shadow. But we have to ask. We have to knock. It's the only way we ultimately discover that we are dear to the divine. The next piece, it's implied in what Krishna was saying, and it's common sense. But we have to remember that we have free will. All right, that's obvious. So what do I mean by that? We stress in our culture so much, what am I experiencing? What am I perceiving? What am I feeling? And that has value. Do not misunderstand me. But our will is not primarily an organ of perception or feeling. It's an organ of action. Let me say it this way. Roy Eugene Davis, direct disciple of Yogananda, who initiated me and ordained me, he said the same thing in many ways, but I'm just going to summarize his many statements. Always stay awake. Always be purposeful. Always be intentional in every and all circumstances. When we're not intentional and we go into automatic pilot, then we will just attune ourselves to whatever the dominant energy is in our presence at that moment. When we are intentional in all situations and in all circumstances, intentional towards being an instrument of the divine, intentional about being God's presence in that moment, intentional about being faithful to truth, beauty, and goodness, that creates an alignment. And you can get to the point where you can be fully engaged with people, but your operating premise, your operating purpose is truth, beauty, and goodness. It is choosing to be of the light. And I'll give you a little example. Vicky's daughter celebrated her Mother's Day this past Sunday, because the week before that we were getting over COVID, and it was also our anniversary, and they celebrated that with us. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was about as perfect as a family gathering could be. It was just lovely, lovely, lovely. And I was allowing myself to merge with that vibration, because it was a very loving vibration. And simultaneously, there was a part of me was praying this prayer: help me to be an instrument of your love in this situation, and help me not to say anything stupid. Okay? So always, in every situation, stay awake. Use your free will. The more we use it, the stronger it becomes. And after a while, that Christ consciousness, the Krishna consciousness, just becomes as natural as breathing. But we have to work at it, and it aligns us. If we don't use our free will, it becomes passive and weak. And again, we become victim to whatever the dominant energy is at that moment. Jesus said, be the light of the world. Our presence is meant to change things. Things are not meant to change us. That's how it's supposed to work. The next one is imagination. Imagination is a faculty of the soul. It's part of how the soul expresses itself, and I'm going to read a quote from Yogananda. Imagination is a portal through which you can transcend the imposed limitations of this world. All creative persons use this power. With wisdom and will, whatever you can imagine and continue to imagine can become real. And he goes on just to essentially repeat that in different ways. So we can misuse our imagination to imagine things that aren't helpful. I'll give you an example. You know, most of you know I have two wonderful foster parents, and they're in their mid to upper 80s, and their minds are still good, but their bodies are really starting to fail them. And particularly it's hard for me with my foster father, because he was always, you know, the man, and always in charge and strong and could do things that I could never do. And to see him fragile. But I'll tell you where my imagination goes if I'm not aware. It's like, oh my God, that's going to happen to me someday. Do you see? And then as long as I go there, then the life force begins to drain out of me. My mood begins to slip, and there's no attunement. Now, that might happen someday, It might not. I might just die in my sleep or something. Who knows? But it's not happening now. So when I'm in that situation, I have to be awake and aware and say, no, today I'm healthy. That's all that I have is today. And God has given me a lot of work to do, so God is going to keep me strong for the future. Do you see? That's a way of using your imagination. I mean, don't you think, and I'm anthropomorphizing God for a moment, but you'll get the truth of it. Don't you think God used God's imagination in creating a rose? It was first a thought in the mind of God that took form. That's how we're supposed to live. Martin Luther King, who's one of my heroes, his I Have a Dream speech was his imagination connected to the imagination of God. That's how we're meant to live. When you wake up every day, take a moment or two and imagine the best outcomes for yourself and the people you love that day. If you're going into a meeting, imagine the best outcome for that day. Use your imagination to connect you to the creative process of God to bring truth, beauty, and goodness into your life and other people's lives. I'll tell you something that I do. I told you when I came back from India that I had a powerful experience of Babaji in the Lahiri Mahasaya's temple in Varanasi. And there was an altar there with a life-size statue of Babaji, and I have a picture of it. But if I just image that altar with Babaji, I kind of go there. And it's not like I'm conjuring it up. Imagining that image of Babaji brings me into conscious contact with Babaji. So learning to use our imagination in an inspired and creative way, it can flip moods. Okay? Imagine being a good husband or being a good wife. Imagine being a good worker. Imagine being a good entrepreneur. It aligns us with the creative juices of God. The last thing, common one, is love, and Krishna uses the word love. This is what I want to say about love. Then I'm going to end with a story that captures it. You've heard me say this a gazillion times. Love is not primarily a romantic feeling. God is love. And there's many dimensions to how that love shows up in time and space. But God is love. And every act of pure love, and I mean this quite literally, it's not a metaphor, it's not hyperbole. Every act of pure love, no matter what the humble situation is literally an act of God. I want to repeat that because I want you to get that. Again, it's not hyperbole. Every act of love, pure love, selfless love, is literally an act of God because God is love and love is God. And it literally changes the trajectory of the people you love, and it changes the whole trajectory of planet Earth. We're meant to spend our spiritual life, if we want to be attuned, we are meant to spend it in deeds of love. And I'm going to share with you a story that captures it. There was a farmer in Scotland. It's a true story. Last name was Fleming. He was a very poor farmer. And he was attending to his fields, trying his best to feed his family. And he hears a cry for help. And he follows the cry, and there's a 10-year-old boy who's stuck in a bog up to his waist. And a bog is like quicksand. It cannot support the weight, and he's sinking. And to make a long story short, he saved the boy. Well, the next day, a wealthy nobleman shows up with a wealthy carriage and a servant or two, and goes to the farmer and says, "That was my son that you saved. and I want to pay you for that. And the farmer said, no, I did what any good person would do. I don't want you to pay me. I don't want your money. And just then the farmer's son, who was about the same age, 10 years old, came out. And the nobleman said, well, how about this? Let me send your son to the same great schools. This was in Scotland. Let me send your son to the same great schools that I'm going to send my son. It was a deed of love. What the farmer did was a deed of love, and it set into motion a series of events. It was an act of God. Every act of God sets into motion events that will sprout and change the course of history. So, this 10-year-old son of the farmer went to the finest schools. He became a medical doctor. His name is Alexander Fleming. He was the one that discovered penicillin. How many of us in this room have been saved by penicillin? Because of those acts of God entering time and space, creating a ripple that will produce the fruit. We're meant to live our life doing deeds of love, but there's one more piece to the story. The nobleman's son, as a young adult, got very, very sick. And it was the penicillin that Alexander Fleming developed that saved the nobleman's son as an adult. You know who that was? Winston Churchill. Who saved Europe from Hitler. Do you see? Every act of love tilts the world towards God, because every act of love is an act of God. God has given you and me such tremendous power. It's not from us, it's from God. To literally birth acts of God in our lives and in planet Earth to tilt the world in the right direction.